You're listening to 882 6PR. Chrissy Morrissey with you in the chair at 10 minutes past 10. And Graham Edwards is a familiar name and a voice here in Western Australia. He went to Vietnam as a young Australian soldier with the 7 RAR on the 12th of May 1970. His life was changed forever when he stepped on an anti-personnel mine. He lost both of his legs, but if you think that's where Graham Edwards' story becomes a story about what was taken from him, we would be very, very wrong, because that gentleman came home. He rebuilt his life and he's become an advocate for veterans and people with disability. He spent 14 years in the West Australian Parliament, later entered federal parliament, served as state president of the RSLWA and was appointed a member of the Order of Australia for his service to veterans and people with disability. And now at 80, he's finally put all that story into a memoir, and it is called Stone the Bloody Crows. And there is another beautiful chapter to this. Graham has spent more than 50 years using a wheelchair himself, and every dollar from the sales of the book is going to a Perth charity called Wheelchair for Kids, Wheelchairs for Kids, where he is the patron to help provide wheelchairs to children living with disability around the world. And he joins us now. Graham, good morning.
Hello.
Graham, good morning to you. Thanks for coming on the program. Hey, on Vietnam Veterans Day, where does your mind go first? Is it to what happened to you, or is it perhaps to the mates that didn't come back with you?
I think Vietnam veterans tend to remember those of our mates who didn't come home. Just remembering that something like 61,000 diggers served, or troops served in Vietnam. 520 of them, 521 were killed and some 3,000 were wounded. But today is really a day about remembering those who didn't come home. And today's a special day for Vietnam veterans, 60 years since the Battle of Long Tan. And, of course, many other battles that followed, places like Balmoral, Coral and lots of other running firefights where Vietnam veterans confronted the enemy, confronted a very wily enemy on their own turf, and in most cases beat them, as happened at Long Tan.
Yeah. Tell us about the young Graham Edwards who got on the plane. Were you frightened, excited? Did you actually comprehend what you were getting into?
No, I didn't comprehend what I was getting into. It was, I guess, a bit of an adventure. I thought that we were right to be in Vietnam. I changed my mind, I might add. Some couple of months later, when I found out that we just didn't have the support of the locals. They just wanted to get rid of us and to get on with their lives. But my thoughts were just, well, it's a bit of an adventure. I'm going to miss my family, but I'm with a group of good mates, and we're determined to go over there and make a good account of ourselves.
And then came the 12th of May 1970. You were on patrol. You stepped on a landmine. What do you remember of that time, Graham?
Well, I remember, first of all, when I trod on the mine, I realised what I'd done, and immediately I just felt this sense of peace and tranquility, and I just seemed to drift skywards.
Wow.
And all of a sudden the pain hit, and I hit the earth with a big thud, and I looked down and I saw that my legs were gone, and I felt a determination. I said, I'm not going to die, I'm not going to die, I'm not going to die. And I thought about my family back home, and as I was laying there I could hear my mates frantically trying to get to me. They just couldn't run up to me because there may be other mines there, and what my mates had to do was prod a way to me to make a safe path. And I knew also that there'd be a helicopter dust-off service on its way to pick me up and get me to hospital. And I just relied on my mates, and I saw true courage that day when those mates put their lives at risk to come and rescue me.
Wow. Graham, I noticed you said you looked down and you pretty much noticed straight away, my legs are gone. Was there ever a moment when you thought, my life as I knew it is over? And you said, please don't die, please don't die. So you knew your legs were gone, and it wasn't, what am I missing, where's my legs? It was just, don't let me die.
I just kept saying to myself, I'm not going to die, I'm not going to die. There's one time when I was in the chopper heading back, and I felt that was it. But, fortunately I pulled through, and thanks to the doctors and the nurses at Australian-based hospital in Vung Tau. They just did remarkable work. They worked miracles and pulled me through and pulled through lots of other diggers who were wounded and badly hurt. You know, those people were just so good, unbelievably good.
Yeah. We talk a lot about thanking veterans for their service, and it's something Steve Mills is very passionate about. And I had the great honour of he asked me to sit next to him this year for the Anzac Day service as he did his broadcast. And just to see the emotion that was through him when people were being so disrespectful, I really felt for him. But that wasn't necessary. You know, when the Aussie Vietnam vets came home, they were certainly disrespected, weren't they? And your memoir talks about the challenge of returning home and rebuilding your life, and that today, I suppose today really is a day for reflecting on the very different reception that Vietnam veterans received. What was it actually like?
Well, look, let me say, you know, I think that Vietnam veterans served with honour, with a great deal of pride and distinction, and with a great deal of compassion. We had a commitment to our mates which was undiminished from those of earlier wars, and a commitment which I think well and truly reflected the great spirit and heritage of the Anzacs. But when we came home, as opposed to different wars, so many Vietnam veterans walked into the cold shoulder of indifference. For many, they walked into the cold shoulder of hostility and ignorance. And see, when I came home, my wounds were visible. People could see them. They could understand them. Lots of other Vietnam veterans came home not visibly wounded, but carrying with them forever the scars of war. Now, those wounds weren't visible. They weren't recognised. They weren't treated. And as a result, I think that had a big impact on veterans, Vietnam veterans. And I think, you know, something like over 500 Vietnam veterans committed suicide after they came home. For many, they just, they became isolated. They figured that if you weren't there, you wouldn't understand it, so what's the point of me talking about it? And I think for them, it was very, very difficult. And fortunately, in time, we had the Vietnam Veterans Counselling Service open up here, and people became to understand more and more about the invisible wounds of war, the post-traumatic stress disorders, which veterans, and I think anyone who serves in the theatre of war, any young man or any young woman, will come home changed to some degree or other. Yeah. And certainly Vietnam veterans did.
Graham, we're going to take a break. It's 18 minutes past 10 on 882 6PR. And when we come back, I want to talk to you about that 1987 Welcome Home that you organised, which, you know, changed that big Welcome Home parade for the Vietnam vets, the book that you're writing, and also about Wheelchair for Kids. Are you good to stay on the line? Today is the 60th anniversary of the Battle of Long Tan, and it is, of course, Vietnam Vets Day, the day that we pay our respects and we commemorate the servicemen and women who went across to Vietnam. And we're talking with Graham Edwards, Vietnam vet and Wheelchair for Kids patron and newly minted author. And I want to start, Graham, in this section, if I can, with that 1987 Welcome Home that you helped to organise, an enormous Welcome Home parade for Vietnam vets in Sydney. At the time, you were president of the WA branch of the Vietnam Veterans Association, newly elected to the WA Parliament. Why do you think Australia needed that parade?
Oh, look, I think it was something that had happened in America. A group of our Australian blokes went over there and they just saw the outpouring of emotions, and they came back here determined to organise one. I was never president of the Vietnam Veterans Association, but I was certainly involved in the Vietnam veteran movement. And we set out here in WA, because we were so far from the other states, to help organise money and to help organise planes and other means of getting our blokes from Western Australia over there. And we had Normie Rowe come over here, and he put together a record that was played a lot on 6PR, I know, and that gave a lot of support to the movement. There was a big effort in Kalgoorlie to raise funds, and they put together a lot of money. And as a result, a lot of West Australians managed to get over to that parade. And it was something to behold. It was an incredibly emotional time for Vietnam veterans. And I think 100,000 odd people lined the streets of Sydney to give a belated welcome home to Vietnam veterans. And I've never seen so many Vietnam veterans in one group marching down the street and wiping the dust from their eyes because they weren't game enough to admit that they were crying, and they were. And the other thing, Chrissy, is so many people who said to us that day, look, we protested against soldiers, we protested against the war, and we're sorry about that protest against the soldiers. It should have been about the government of the day. But it was a great healing day for so many veterans and a great healing day for so many of their families. And I think it turned the corner for many Vietnam veterans who came together with mates they hadn't seen since the war. There was a lot of forgiveness, a lot of friendship, and I think it was a lot of healing that day for many Vietnam veterans.
Pretty special. Did you happen to catch Normie Rowe having a chat with the boys this morning on the Brekkie program?
I didn't. I've been at meetings, but I remember Normie came over here and we put that record together. It's called Somewhere Tonight, and Normie was a great. He really got stuck in and helped a lot of blokes get over there.
Yeah. Jim, we've got so many lovely text messages coming in just saying thank you to you. I think you should be aware of that. That's what's happening in the background. I'd like to ask you, you're one of those men when I look at you, Graham, and you're just ageless. You've always looked the same ever since I've known you. It's hard to believe that you're actually 80 now. So you've waited until 80 to write your book, Stone the Bloody Crows, and add another string to your bow there. Why now? Was there something that you wanted for your children, your grandchildren, and perhaps all Aussies who weren't alive during Vietnam to understand before those stories disappear? Why wait until 80?
Chrissy, I actually started writing the book about 10 years ago, but I found it a bit hard. And, you know, I did a little bit at a time and I'd walk away and leave it and come back. But I really wanted it just for my family. But a couple of other people got hold of it and said, you've got to spread this a bit wider. And I thought because of my involvement with wheelchairs for kids, perhaps I'll spread it a bit wider and we can donate all of any profits, if enough books sold, to go and assist the great work that Wheelchairs for Kids did. And that's basically where it came from. But it took me about 10 years to put it together.
No. There's something wonderfully circular about what you're doing with this book, isn't there? You've relied on wheelchairs for more than half a century. You've travelled back to Vietnam with Wheelchairs for Kids and seen what mobility can mean for a child. And now every dollar from that memoir going back into providing those wheelchairs. Does a wheelchair give a child that people who can walk perhaps never think about, not just movement, but something else, something really special? Can you explain that? What does the wheelchair give?
Well, particularly in those war-torn countries, for instance, where some kids have stepped on landmines or been otherwise injured, by the detritus of war. Often, and I've seen these kids in Asian countries, some without legs, some who just can't walk, or some who might simply be ill, dragging themselves through gutters, through the mud, through the dirt, on the streets. And look, if a child like that gets a wheelchair from Wheelchairs for Kids, the difference it makes to that child is immeasurable. It makes such a difference to that child's life, to the life as he's found, and often to the life of a village. And I was in Vietnam some years ago, and I saw a young lad in the hospital who was granted one of these Wheelchairs for Kids, made in Perth wheelchairs, and he got on that chair and he was up and down the ward and his eyes just shone like spotlights of stars in the night. And I couldn't believe just how grateful that young boy was to receive that chair. And it just makes such a difference. And I suppose being in a wheelchair myself, I feel more for those kids, and I just see what they do, and I see what work the wonderful volunteers up at Wangara in the workshop, the Brother Ollie workshop up there. They've made something like 70,000 wheelchairs, and they've sent them to about 100 different countries. Many of those countries war-torn, places like Gaza, Vietnam, so many other places, Laos, Cambodia, all over the world. And the difference that those volunteers up there at Wangara have made to so many kids in the world is just unbelievable.
Graham, I reckon people will hear your story and say, how did he do all of that, all these things that you've done after losing both your legs? But I suspect that you probably don't spend your life thinking of yourself extraordinary, do you? What did you decide about your life after Vietnam that allowed you to keep moving forward?
Look, I was just so happy to be alive and so pleased to be home with my family and pleased to be back in a country like Australia. And I come to value just how lucky we are to live in Australia. But I got involved in my local community. I didn't want my kids to see their father as being, a cripple and invalid. I got involved in the local P&C associations, local sports groups, and invariably I got drawn towards getting involved in local government. I was elected to the city of Stirling, and the next thing I found myself in state politics and then federal politics without really any plan, without ever having any ambition to be a politician. It just happened that way.
If we go back to that young soldier that I asked you about when you first got on the plane, the young man that you were before Vietnam, knowing everything that was coming, what would you tell him as he looked out the window?
Pull your bloody head in, sport. I can remember my father saying, "Stone the bloody crow, son, what the hell have you done now?" That's probably what I'd be saying to myself. But look, you can't go back in life. You can never go back, Chrissy. And, you've just got to take life as it comes and deal with life in the best way that you can. As I said, I was just so grateful and so happy to be alive, and I just didn't want to waste my life. And, I'm so happy to have been able to get involved to the degree that I have. And, I love Australia and I love Australian people. We're just so fortunate and so lucky to live here. And I just hope that we can continue to do things for people in other places, and particularly other kids who are less fortunate than those of us here. And that's why I'm such a great supporter of wheelchairs for kids.
Mr. Edwards, thank you for your time with us today. We really appreciate it.
Hey, you're a real bottler, Chrissy, and thanks very much. Cheers.
Good on you. Graham Edwards, his memoir is Stone the Bloody Crows. All the proceeds go to wheelchairs, part of those proceeds go to wheelchairs for kids. And really, really grateful to Graham for sharing with us this morning. And I'd like to hear from you now.